Hey, on this episode of the Ethics Experts, we talk with Kasturi about how to become a better business partner, how to expand the influence of your compliance program within your organization, and how to really make better human-to-human connections within your career. Hope you enjoy it. Let's learn.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie. Hope you're having an amazing day. The world is a better place because you're in it. See what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts. You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So it's a kind of a no-brainer to subscribe and join us as we change the world by making our workplaces better. Great little treat for you today. We have a great episode for you today. We have Kasturi here. She's an ethics and compliance professional, has a really cool background, a lot of really great experience, and welcome. Happy to have you on.
Hi, Nick. Great to be here.
Yeah. So we linked up and, I learned a little bit about your background and I'm kind of excited to have you on. I really always like to kind of start with your story. How did you end up in the ethics and compliance field? I doubt you were growing up as a little girl trying to become a compliance officer or get on that path. So what in your upbringing and what in your background drove you toward this profession?
You say growing up as a little girl, you probably didn't want to be a compliance officer, but I was close. Before I start, I just want to say all opinions today are in my individual standpoint as an individual person and not representative of my employer. So I'm just doing this purely in a personal standpoint. So when I was in 8th grade, I had a cousin and I went up and I saw him. He was suave, he was charming, he was all those things. Then I asked my parents, what does he do? And they were like, oh, he's a lawyer. So I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to be. And my parents were like, oh, she's in 8th grade. She wants to be a lawyer. So they said, well, if you have the same thing when you come to 12th grade, and I studied in India, where you have to decide what you want to be at the age of 18. So they said, when you 1 year less at 17, if you still want to be a lawyer, we'll support you through and through. Time passed. I was 17. They were like, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a lawyer. I said, that's what started this whole journey. But then I initially thought I was going to go into M&A in the legal field, decided to become a professor after some time, stopped short of a PhD, worked for a couple of years in the immigration law space, and then came into ethics and compliance.
So what was it about being a professor that was enticing to you?
I love people. I love relationships with people. I love building those relationships with people. And the sheer amount of knowledge that's transacted in a classroom, you learn so much from your students, they learn from you, and you get to shape those minds, you get to shape the culture, you get to shape people. And that by itself is so fulfilling.
So you went into immigration for a while, and then you made this transition into ethics and compliance.
I did.
How did that opportunity come up, and what was it about what you learned about that opportunity that you were like, gravitated toward it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in India, I worked for a little while in the ethics and compliance department. I was really young. That was one of my first jobs out of law school. I really liked it, but then I was also geared in my path towards becoming a professor. So I started to do a couple masters in laws. When I saw this opportunity pop up, I was like, oh my gosh, I get to do this again. I applied, went through, and then the rest is history. I've just been doing this for the past 2.5 years now again. It's been a lot of fun.
Very good. When, as you've been in ethics and compliance, you start to, develop a philosophy. I think that's true in any field, right? As you get into it, you kind of don't know which way is up, and you have all this sort of academic knowledge and book knowledge and, kind of these, these frameworks. And then you get into an industry or you get into a company and you start actually interacting. And some of those frameworks are super helpful, and some of those you end up throwing away because they don't apply or whatever. And I think over time you start to kind of accumulate like a way of doing things. And when you consider your current sort of view on how compliance should work or how it works best, how has that view changed, relative to when you first got into the space? Right? We always have these misconceptions, or we have these
100%.
Ideas about things, and then they sort of move. Like, what were some of those biggest movements on your compliance journey?
An understanding of how a certain amount of risk is important, no matter what company it is. So whichever space I was in throughout my career, just understanding that you do need a certain amount of risk. How you mitigate that risk is what is most important. And I think that really depends on the company you're with, their risk tolerance, your leadership's risk tolerance, the industry's tolerance to risk. That can change industry to industry.
Totally.
So learning about that, and something I've always maintained since day one, which hasn't changed actually, has been building good relationships. I think that
Right.
is so central to what we do as ethics and compliance professionals. That is central to most jobs, I think, but especially this job.
Yeah, I think that is true, right? Because we need everybody's participation in order for our job to work, and
Absolutely.
that's
Whether
not
it's a buy-in or whether it's just collaborating with your stakeholders, if you don't have those relationships, you're not going to be able to operate in a vacuum.
why do you think that's good advice? Do you know what
Building
I'm
good
saying?
relationships.
Like it seems so obvious at some level,
Uh-huh.
and yet everybody doesn't do it. Everybody doesn't focus, I would say, sort of the right amount on those relationships. And the evidence of that is the frustration that so many people in this industry have in getting other departments to like participate and do what they need to do for, for the pursuit of mitigating risk or building a culture of integrity or whatever the thing is, So why do we struggle with that? Why is that advice? I mean, I think it's great advice, but why is it good advice?
Why is it good advice? Because it doesn't come to us naturally. And I think with in this age of social media, especially
Yeah.
when everyone's just hiding behind a screen, just going up to someone you meet in a coffee room and going, say, "Hi, I'm Kasturi," or going to a water cooler and saying, "Hi, I'm Kasturi," or seeing someone maybe participate in an event at work, going up to them and saying, "I really liked what you did there." And starting a genuine human connection is the basis of what is going to help you in your work. So this isn't a manipulated thing saying, "Oh, because I met you there, you're going to help me in my work."
Right.
But instead, really getting to know the person, because then they're going to be more open with you. They're going to be comfortable approaching you, speaking up, and also telling you what's wrong. And that's what we want to know, right? We want to know what's wrong so we can fix it.
Right.
Or we want to know what the pain points are so we can mitigate it. And that really helps.
Yeah, that does really help. And, there was this, I think this was in the book Influence, this is one of my like favorite books. And it talks about how like the terms of a relationship can really influence like the dynamic of the relationship. And so it gives this example of if you asked me, "Hey, Nick, I'm moving," and you said, "Hey, Nick, I'm moving. I need some help moving," I would say, "I'm busy that day. When do you need it?" I'm just kidding. I would say, "We just met." I'm just kidding. But I'm saying that like I would come and help you as a friend. And you're like, "Hey, I'm going to get some pizza and beers, and we're going to move." How different does that feel from my standpoint? Pizza and beers, come and help me, friend, move, versus you saying, "Hey, I need some help moving. I'm going to give you $150. Can you come and help me?" That movement from human to human, from like authentic connection to this sort of more business-like transactional
More
thing,
transactional.
it like
Yeah.
dehumanizes the connection. Now this is an exchange
Yes.
of currency for a provision of labor.
Absolutely.
But to your point, so many of us go into work just living on this side of it, living on that transactional side and not creeping over into that human to human connection, to your point, which is where the basis of relationships are, where the thread count of the culture of life sort of increases and the fabric of the culture of your business that increases when you have actual, more connections, you know what I mean? And I just, it's interesting, I'm just kind of reflecting on my own career. When I first came into when I came out of undergrad, I just felt so buttoned up and I had to feel like I was this fake version of who I am. And over
Right.
time, I've gotten more confident in myself. I've gotten more confident in this axiom that you just sort of shared, the importance of sort of human to human connection. And that's allowed sort of more of my authentic self to come out, which I think accelerates the connections I'm able to make with people. And I think that's true for kind of all of us. How do we help people who might still be carrying that facade from undergrad or whatever, who are still kind of living in that realm where it's harder to make those human to human connections or introduce themselves to somebody at the water cooler? How do we get them more comfortable, or how do we get them more motivation or more confidence to start exploring that aspect of their interaction in the workplace?
About human interactions. I love that you touched upon authenticity because I think that is so important. Coming out, I don't know where the idea comes from, but some people are like, "Oh, I have to be a certain way, right?
Right.
To exist in the workplace, or this is what is expected of me." I mean, apart from our common sense principles
For
of
sure.
respect and dignity and professionalism, but you can bring your authentic personal self into the workplace. Let me give you a small example. If it's using an emoji in an email, many people might be like, oh, can I really put a smiley face in an email? I do that all the time.
Right.
That's a part of me. You can be yourself. Sorry, you were about to say
No,
something.
no, I was just going to say that you do that all the time in these other relationships that you have outside of work that are authentic relationships. Like the people who know you and love you know the actual you. They don't know the professional you or the facade encased you. You know what I'm saying? So allowing those things in, I think, is absolutely appropriate because again, this is not 1955 anymore where it's a corporate thing. I mean, this is knowledge work. We are our work. We are the lines between work and home are like dissolved at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like it's an open gate for us to push more of our authentic selves into our work for sure.
And with changing times, you need to be more authentic. You need to be who you are.
Right.
Because that's when your business relationships, like you said, develop. How do you know what your team needs unless you really understand?
Yeah,
How do you know what your client needs? How do you know what the project needs? But when you have an understanding of how humans work, how that particular human works, then you have a better understanding of how the business relationship should work.
Right.
So I think my advice would just be for people to be themselves and also realize that most people are not going to push you away. They're mostly going to be welcoming if you go say hello.
For sure.
No, very few people are going to turn their face away and walk away.
Well, and also it's such an exhibition of like leadership, tacit leadership, to exhibit the behavior that you want to see from other people. And it's also kind of an implicit recognition that that other person who hasn't said hello yet, they're probably feeling the same way. They're probably feeling the confusion. Where's the line of where how much of myself can I be, And, I guess at some level, we're probably never going to be our full selves, our total selves at work. But like, how close can we get to that? The closer you can get to your point, I think it's much richer and so forth. And, as you were telling, as you were saying that, I was kind of reflecting back on how in many of my I've had several of these like really professional relationships that have lasted a really long time at a certain like level. And then some event happens where, you get a drink with somebody or you joke around with somebody.
You connect over coffee.
Exactly. Yeah. And then boom, you're like in this much deeper relationship. It like moves the pieces together or something, or it like builds the bridge across the chasm a lot faster,
It does. And the beauty of that is tomorrow, if you have a situation in front of you, how easy is it for you to pick up the phone and say, hi, I have the situation and I want to talk to you, rather than go through a formal email exchange or set up a formal meeting. Right? That is invaluable.
Yeah.
And that is a great tool to have in your toolbox.
Yeah, and it's really just doing a little bit of homework at some level, right? Like you're building some relational equity inside the organization so that when you need something, again, as I say this, it's probably going to sound very self-serving, but it is the self-serving benefit of this thing. If we know each other and I have a question and that comes to you, you're going to want to respond to that versus me cold emailing you from some other department and we've never talked before. That falls into the bucket of like, I don't even know what the heck this is. I'll get to this when I'm done with my to-do list or whatever it is, right? So there's a certain velocity of information exchange and action that can come from these, like authentic relationships are like paved roads. Without those, you're really just kind of like wandering through this forest. You know what I'm saying? You can't go that fast.
And you also have that element of trust that comes in.
Great point, yeah.
You trust the other person, you know what their strengths are, and you know how to work with them, right? And you have each other's back. And that's what builds a good culture within the organization as well. You have transparency, you have trust. You have this culture where people can say, I know I can talk to this other person without feeling uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I like that you touched upon the hallmarks of good leadership. Because for me, a good leader is someone who also does the same thing. One, they listen, not just hear the other person, but they actually listen and say, yes, this can work. Or, let's tweak this. Let's see how this can work in this manner. Another hallmark of a good leader is when something goes wrong with them, but they're open about it to their team and say, I did this. It went wrong. Here are some lessons for you to learn from what I did. That openness is what I feel makes a really good leader.
And what is it about that openness that you think resonates? Like they're a good leader in your mind, obviously, because they're resonant with the people that they're over or something. But what is it about that openness you think is so engaging or so attractive or magnetic, whatever?
One is an open door policy. You know you can approach your leader when you've made a mistake. What does that mean? That means that when issues happen, they're not hidden. They come to the forefront because you have an open dialogue with your leader. Two, when lessons are being learned, it's coming down from the top. It sets the tone at the top where you say, this is something we've learned and we want all of you to learn from it. And three, you know your leader has your back.
Yeah, and it's, to your point, I think so much of our struggle in work, in business, whatever, is like the lack of clarity.
That's true.
I have something going on in my life that I don't share with people, and I show up in a way, and we all as human beings have this, cognitive error-prone mind that we, put a negativity bias on there, and boy, Nick is really disengaged lately. And it's like, well, maybe I just had a death in the family, right? So there's some information that you don't have that I have,
right?
That
a communication gap.
Yeah, there's a communication and essentially, an information gap that causes you to arrive at a conclusion that's inaccurate, right? And causes me to help create that inaccurate, chaotic kind of, dynamic. And so the more we can do to drop those veils or drop that wall and see more of what's going on, the quicker we can actually respond to it. And, I think in ethics and compliance, we struggle with this a lot. We talk about this. I was just talking about this on a webinar recently that last year, 65% of people witnessed wrongdoing at work. Okay. So that's 65 out of 100, presumably reportable things. This is not counting questions and all those other inquiries, if I can speak to it.
These are actual policy violations or
or
potential.
Perceived ones, right? They may or may not be, but it could be due to the individual's misconception around where the line is and what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. But the point is 65% of people reported that they saw wrongdoing at work last year. And then if you look at the benchmark reports that are out there, organizations on average are getting between 1.5 and 3.5. Call it, 2 to 4 reports per 100. So there's all of this risk intelligence that's just kind of floating out in our organization. There's all of these, data points that are out there that we don't get to see. There's no clarity around them. And, it all kind of gets stuck. It makes it harder for ethics and compliance to do its job. It makes it harder for, it makes it easier for people to leave an organization where they don't feel like their voice is heard. And it's I'm just so on right now, thinking about how do we get from 4 reports to 100 per 100 to, 65 is the ceiling. We're at 4. So how do we get to 10? How do we get to 20? There's a ton out there. How do we get that in a more with a higher velocity, and, how can that drive better impact from our teams,
I love that question because I think speaking up is so important. I've been talking about it this whole show. But one is, like I said, approachable leaders, approachable people in general. 2, how many avenues do people have to report? If you're uncomfortable using one avenue, do you have avenue 2, avenue 3, right? That widens your reporting base as well. 3, awareness. Do they know how to report? Do they know when? Do they know if there's an anti-retaliation policy in place? Do they know when to report? Do they know what to report? So all of that, when you have that awareness and training, I think that really helps. But the main thing here is building that culture where people are encouraged to speak up freely and being told by the leaders that they're safe. This is a place that you want to be safe working in. And I think that's what I've seen throughout my career. That's when people talk.
It's such an interesting metaphor almost, or a picture of what we were just talking about, where you're saying it's fine for people to know that you exist inside of an organization. They might know your email address, but it's also a very different thing if they know you and you've had you built a relationship with them, right? And so it's now kind of carrying it to this conversation. On the one level, they have to know how to report and who to report to, what they need to report, to your point, around the awareness and essentially the advertising for the channels and the instructions to how to engage with those channels in the most effective way. That's one piece of it. That's them knowing that this stuff exists. But then the other piece of it, which is the more ethereal, the more amorphous piece, is the trust piece that you're just talking about. They have to trust that the organization has these protections in place. They have to trust that it's going to be a safe place to speak up, which they can get that proof or that evidence from leadership, tone at the top, or the other things that you kind of mentioned. But it's in either one of those realms, the person-to-person cross-departmental relationship or the broad sort of corporate relationship with the quote-unquote workforce, those two elements need to be there. The information, the structure, but then also it needs to be filled with that trust if there's ever going to get it.
With the trust, with approachability, and knowing that, if I have an issue, I just know this person who sits 2 desks away from me.
Right.
And I'm comfortable at saying, can we get coffee? I need to talk to you.
So how do we affect it? Let's just do like a little brain experiment, a little thought experiment.
Let's do a hypo. Yeah.
High level, we're at 4 reports per 100 on average across the economy. There's 65 available. How do we get, let's say in 5 years, get that 4 reports to 12 reports, 3x that?
Honestly, I think it is focusing on the things we just spoke about, right? And the reports will grow. Because when the culture shifts, people will take notice and they'll shift too. Instead of just leaving the organization in their minds now, they're like, oh, I have an avenue. Maybe I can fix my issue rather than just leaving. Again, going back to managers and leaders, good leaders, why would you want to leave a good leader or a good team? You'd want to fix what's wrong.
Great point.
I think it's the culture shift.
Yeah, and man, that's so smart what you just said. I think you're right. I think that's what leads it. That's what's going to make people feel that trust. And I think people are going to leave an organization. We're in this sort of epidemic of like churn.
Of course,
people jumping
leave for myriad reasons.
Myriad reasons. Half of the reasons over the last 12 months were like for values-based reasons. Like if you go through the top 10 things, but like the cost of changing jobs is so low. You know what I'm saying? It's very easy to change jobs,
Yes.
and people are not willing to stick around. They're not willing to kind of tolerate that. But to your point, I would say they're not willing to tolerate it if they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. But I have seen several times over the years, an employee or somebody on our team is like in a bad spot and they're like got a foot out the door. You know what I'm saying? And then many times they'll see, that comes to leadership and we like try to fix it and they see a response and it's like it like rebuilds some more trust. And then they're like, okay, well, this is actually better than I thought. And like to your point, let's try to fix this. I don't want to leave a good team. There's something here that I want to hold on to. You know what I mean?
Want to hold on to. You're right. If they're leaving for other reasons, of course, that's normal. That's your
whatever.
Usual ebb and flow of people. But retaining people because of fixing issues that weren't fixed earlier, that's a culture shift.
Right.
That's a culture shift that's torn from the top.
So how do we get more? So I haven't disagreed with you yet. So how's that? But how do we get like more credit for the work that the ethics and compliance team is doing? Because I mean, I talk to people, dozens of people per week that are in this space. It's a very consistent archetype. We care, we're trying to make the world better, we're trying to leave it better than we found it, right? These are all the kind of foundational elements of the sort of ethics and compliance professional, right? So there's all this great work being done behind the scenes, but it's like the employee base doesn't even know about it. So there's all this like latent trust potential, this sort of kinetic trust that's being done behind the scenes that never ends up turning into actual like culture energy.
You brought that up. I think how ethics and compliance has evolved over the years is from us being viewed as a watchdog to us now slowly being viewed as a key business partner. And that is what we need to imbibe, right? Mm-hmm. We need to socialize ethics and compliance among the company employees, among company leadership, where we can say, we can bring you this business value. What is the business value we can bring you? How can we ensure that your operations go on smoothly? And that is what you're bringing to them. And when you can show employees and leaders that that is what you bring to the table, that is when we get that recognition. We're not the big bad wolf anymore. Mm-hmm. We're trying to make you work as efficiently, as best as possible.
Yeah, and I think when that light bulb goes on, there's a lot that we can unlock. You used a very specific word, and you said we need to be able to, show our value to other people. They need to see us as valuable because there's a value mismatch to some degree, right? And like we think we have this much value. The broad organization, again, I'm painting in broad brushstrokes. We have this much value. The organization thinks that we have this much value. So It's probably somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's higher. I don't know. But like we have to, that mismatch causes a lot of like broad organizational value leakage, which shows up on a bottom line, right? So the more of that leakage we can capture, the more that turns into the positive benefits or the positive externalities or the positive results that come from a successful business, right? So,
and I'm going to tie that back into socializing with people. Because when you talk to people, you can tell them exactly what you do.
Exactly.
They're like, oh, I didn't know you did this and this. And then maybe the next question is, but how does it really help us? And then
Yeah.
that's your entry point.
That's your entry point. And, I think that word value is the right word, and we just can't think about value too myopically. Obviously, dollars and cents attached to some impact, that's a very tangible, easy to sort of objectively define as value. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that, like, a relationship is value. A listening ear is value. Information or insights that ops doesn't have, but I have because it's come out of my speak up line, is a ton of value that they can respond to and so forth.
And how much are you saving now?
Exactly.
Saving later, sorry,
Exactly.
by mitigating risk now.
Exactly.
Right? That is actually a dollar value you can put on.
Yeah, and just, listen, if people are leaving organizations because they don't feel like they have a voice, right? They don't have a listening ear. They don't have a way for their voice to be heard. Well, if we in our organization are providing a way for their voice to be heard, and we actually authentically want them to know that their voice is heard, and we're doing things in response to those voices that we hear, well, then we have to get some credit for that, because that is valuable to them. That's valuable to people, and we need to have confidence in that value and bring that boldness to our interactions with folks, because either we're right or they're right.
Internally. I agree completely. And that's better business both internally and externally.
100%.
Both your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders are happy because you're in a way doing the right thing. Of course, we can talk about what doing the right thing means, but you are doing these things to help. And that is going to show.
Yeah, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but there's this like syndrome called like Munchausen by proxy or something. Have you heard of this thing?
Uh-huh.
This is like,
I haven't.
Okay, so this might be wrong, but there is one like this where, let's say I'm highly neurotic. I'm not. Let's say I'm highly neurotic, and I think my kid is always sick. And so I'm always taking my kid to the doctor, because there's something wrong with them. At some point, that kid is going to start to believe that there's actually something wrong with them, even if it's a phantom thing that I've just, psychotically.
In your head.
Exactly, right? So I feel like this is maybe a little dramatic, but like I feel like that's happening in our industry at some level, where we've been told we're a cost center, we're a watchdog, we're the police, we're the Office of No for so long that it's almost like we start to believe it. But there's all of this value behind the scenes that's actual value. It's actual heart. It's actual caring. It's actual risk mitigation. You know what I'm saying? It's like actions that are actually being taken that it's like we're healthy and we think we're sick. So how then do we go out into the world if we think we can't even exist in that world? How do we go out there if we don't think that we're adding value? It's like so much of it just seems like a mindset shift to unlock this stuff, to unlock the natural connectedness, connection ability that we have outside of work, to unlock and share, the value that we're providing to the organization in a little bit more clear way,
100%, Nick. And I think people really respond to the why of things. Why are you doing this? Right? Why are we doing what we do? And when they understand the why, like you said, it's a light bulb moment. They're like, oh, this is why they do it.
Right.
It's not to prevent me from doing business. It's to ensure I'm doing business better.
Right.
But the only way that can happen is by socializing ethics and compliance. We're usually a small group of people in organizations. We're absolute nerds. We love what we do. But we're a tiny, tiny group of people. And in any organization, we need to get out there and make ourselves known.
Right.
And explain the why of it. And I think that helps.
Yeah, I think, the heart of everybody I talk to is a positive thing. They want their business to go faster. They want it to go better. They want people to be able to do their jobs in a cleaner way. You know what I'm saying? There's really not despite the sort of like stereotype that our, industry has, I don't find people to be anti-business. They don't seem at odds with the business at all. I agree with you. That's what I'm saying.
We want the business to grow.
Correct.
We want to protect our people and the company while allowing the business to grow. And I think that's a basic tenet that all the ethics and compliance professionals share.
Right.
I was reading Tuesdays with Maury recently, and he says that something I use in my everyday life. He says, love or perish. And I believe that life is so short that we have to live it well every single day. But in an ethics and compliance perspective, I think it's change or perish. We have to change our thought process, right? Because unless we change with the changing times and change the way we approach things, whether it's socializing or whether it's the way we put across communications, we're always going to be viewed as a watchdog. And
Right.
that's changing. We're not a watchdog anymore.
Yeah, and I guess there's kind of a high agency and a low agency approach to changing that perception. And the low agency one is to say, well, my work is just going to speak for itself. And you're really just kind of rolling the dice and crossing your fingers and hoping that you're making the right
That somebody
timeline bet.
notices.
Yeah, and it's a time-based bet is what it is, because you feel like you're doing this work and you just think, man, if I can just keep doing this work, people are going to notice. And you're betting that the time it takes for people to notice is going to be shorter than what your true limit of like lack of recognition or motivation is going to be. That's the actual bet you're making. So that's a low agency approach. Head down, I'm just going to work through it and people are going to notice it. The high agency approach is to both keep your head down, do a great job, but also be out there, to your point, sharing that more, uprooting the misconceptions that people may have about our department or due to the way we've behaved in the past or the way our predecessor behaved or the interactions they had with our sort of similar department at their last organization. We have to uproot those things. And to your point, all these dynamics are rooted in opinions, and those opinions are all affectable. We can move those things.
We can. And I think that is why it's so important that most organizations are now focusing on culture. They're focusing on human well-being, culture. And I mean, of course, ESG is ESG, but those are the tenets, right? That is the basic principles, human well-being. How can we have a fair labor workforce? And all of that ties in.
So let's say somebody who's listening to this is working at a 7,000 person organization. They're on a small team with, 5 people, let's say.
Okay.
And they're vibing with everything you're saying. She's right. My gosh, we have to get out there. We have to connect with people and so forth. We need to change this culture. But then they consider their culture, and it seems like an insurmountable thing to change. It seems like trying to turn a battleship. What advice or inspiration or perspective would you give somebody who's in those shoes, who wants to make that change, but thinks it's just too big of a mountain to climb?
I think it's too much. Start slow. Of course, you'll say, oh my gosh, Kasturi, that is the most obvious response. But I'll tell you why. Start slow and don't give up. What can you do? What one piece of communication can you get out there that makes people say, oh, we have an ethics and compliance department? Never knew that. That's good enough. Change is not going to happen instantaneously. But even if you can, and again, if you have a stakeholder and they're sending out communications, can you partner with them? What are ideas you can come up with to get yourself out there? And maybe you won't get buy-in the first time or the second time or the third time, but maybe you'll get it the fourth time.
Right.
For something really small that you want to do. Maybe you'll get it the fifth time. But it's about putting yourself out there and showing what business value you can bring.
Yeah, that's really smart. As you were talking, I was just kind of, obviously looking at you, but I was just like, you're such a likable person. You build so much trust. Like it's got, everybody in the world is either like a stranger or a friend to you, probably. Like you either haven't met them or they're your friend. And I'm just saying, like, that is such a unique, like, energy that I see a lot of people like this, though, in our space, and it's like we don't want to put ourselves out there. I mean, imagine a video every week on Slack or on Teams or whatever people use of the compliance person, someone like you, talking about your, what you care about. Hey, I want to hear your voice. I want to, that is a very, you do enough of those, to your point, you can multiply your influence in a much greater way, and you can really kind of reframe the heart behind the department that many people have a misconception about,
I agree. And it's also looking as to what your executive leadership or what your regional leadership really cares about the most and tying in your priorities with that.
Right.
So if you have similar priorities, you're not butting heads, right? You say, this is how I can help you achieve what you want. And then slowly you're becoming that valuable business partner.
Very good. I have a question for you. So like, most industries go in life cycles like this, where they start small and then they grow a lot and then they get like mature, right? Every industry does that. And so it feels like our industry is kind of on this upswing, but some industries actually die and they go back down and they have less influence and less action in them and so forth. So like, where do you think we're at on this journey, on like the the industry life cycle
On a
journey.
curve, yeah.
And if you think that we're on an upswing, what do you think would cause us to either continue that up higher, forward, more, bigger, versus us kind of falling down a little bit and that industry sort of, retracting a bit?
I like that. It's almost a summation of what we've spoken. I think as long as we focus on culture, as long as we focus on showing our value to leadership, we're going to stay on that upswing. Because when people realize what we bring to the table, everyone's going to want a piece of ethics and compliance.
Right.
What leads to the downswing? Not socializing ourselves enough, not putting ourselves out there enough, not listening. And certain companies, I don't know, but if you sit in your ivory tower and don't really know what happens in the business, there's going to be a disconnect.
Totally, yeah.
Let's say hypothetically, you have a policy and you're putting that policy in place, and everyone is just like, that's not how it works. How am I supposed to follow this when I just can't work with it? There's a disconnect there already. So making sure we're being aware of what the gaps are, fixing, reviewing, patching up, fixing, reviewing again, and having that connect, that'll prevent the slide down.
So you've said something a couple of times, a couple of different ways that's kind of resonating with me. But at one point you said, stay very persistent. And you told the story about you being in 8th grade and going to 12th grade, and you stayed very persistent in that dream. You seem like a very sort of, train on the tracks person. If you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And it seems like you've built a muscle of like grit, call it, where that persistence is difficult because you're continuing efforts in the face of like no like progress seemingly, right? So how did that persistence come about for you, and what keeps you in that really persistent mode? Like, how do you not get discouraged? You know what I'm asking here?
No, I do get discouraged sometimes. I think I've always been a very type A person when it comes to work. A little more laid back in personal life, but when it comes to work, it's very type A. So if I say, I want to do this, then I'm my hardest critic. But then something I've learned, because I remember you asking me at the beginning of the show, what is something that you just doesn't work for you anymore now that you've been working for these many years? If you have a plan and you're so rigid about the plan, you're not willing to bring in any flexibility, that's when it's not going to work. But if you have a plan, you say, this is my end goal, but I am flexible about the route I'm willing to take or the time it takes me to get to that end goal, it becomes easier on yourself. So you're still achieving what you want to achieve, but you're giving yourself the grace to say, this changed, so let me change my plans accordingly.
Back to the Tuesdays with Maury thing, right? Like, change your parish. Like, if your
Change
plans
your
are
parish.
so...
She's a lover parish, but change your parish. Same thing.
Yeah, I mean, if your plans are so rigid that they won't account for any inevitable change, then those aren't that good of plans, and your hope and faith in those plans is sort of misplaced.
It is. It also really helps, Nick, that I really love what I do.
Yeah.
I think some days when I go to work, and this has been happening ever since I started to work, I'm like, this doesn't work. I really enjoy doing all of this, and you're paying me to do this. So when you find that, it really works.
It makes it easier, yeah. I guess when you find some train tracks, it's easier to keep the train on the tracks. You know what I mean?
It is easier to keep the train on the tracks.
So I always like to wrap our show up with asking this question. If you could go back in time and find a young you, maybe it's you in 8th grade or you in 12th grade or whatever, what piece of advice do you wish you had sooner? And it can't be any advice you've already kind of given implicitly. This has to be a new advice.
A piece of advice I had sooner. To give myself more grace. You said persistence. Persistence is good. But a lot of us in the field, we're so motivated to do what we do. But allowing ourselves that grace is so important as well. I've just given myself more grace. And I've had a lot of fun in my life, but also to have fun in whatever you do. The minute you take that away, everything goes.
It's so true. My dad used to say that, and I just thought he said, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right, or you're not doing the right thing.
Exactly.
And I just thought it was such a platitude, and I think It's not.
It's not
really
a cliche. It's not a platitude.
No, it's not.
Life's too short not to live it well.
Totally.
And we spend a lot of our life working. So bring in the fun, bring in the grace, and keep loving what you do.
Well, I love it, man. This was such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for joining
It
us
was
on your
super
day
fun
off,
talking
no less. We got the real relaxed version of you, which was phenomenal. We didn't get the type A you. We got the casual, relaxed you.
No, no, this is my chatting with Nick over coffee.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, we will see you soon. Thank you so much for joining us on the Ethics Experts.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.